So we're going to be talking about the Daily Laws, written by Robert Greene. I've always enjoyed the work of Robert Greene because I like the way he views the world as like a dark place that you need to navigate through it. It's almost like he's got this Machiavellian perspective, and I think that's really honest. I think he may refer to that as intense realism. Anyway, when you look at this book, The Daily Laws, it has a different type of setup because each page is like different types of wisdom, and the chapters are actually months. So like chapter 1 is January, chapter 2 is February, chapter 3 is March, etc. So we're just going to discuss 3 concepts from each chapter. And the first concept, well actually before I get to the first concept, I'll get to the premise of the first concept. So the premise is that we all have a life task, and what's underlying this is, quote, all of us are born unique, end of quote, meaning that our DNA is unique, but we need to find our life task, which is defined as, your purpose. And actually Robert Greene details that at the age of 8 he knew he wanted to be a writer, and then on top of this premise is this whole concept of the inner voice that can guide us to our life task. And to do this we need to reconnect with our childhood, which links to the first interesting concept, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this, is the real secret. And according to Robert Greene, the real secret is the acknowledgement that the brain is the outcome of 6 million years of evolution. So the brain is the path to real mastery. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I guess I represent all those people who read the 48 Laws on a train back and forth to London or something. And so I haven't read this book, and what you're getting here is my instant reactions. I completely understand the idea of the life task, I think, but let me just put it in the perspective in which I would see it. I think it's extremely difficult for somebody, at least most people, to say in their early years, I want to be X or I want to do Y. What we do know is that some things interest us vastly more than other things. And also we're better at some things than other things. There are a few exceptions. So for example, people often think they're great singers, and the only person who doesn't realise that they're not is themselves. But generally speaking, I think there's a lot of coincidence between what we enjoy and what we're good at. And it seems to me the purpose of life and the struggle of life in that context has to do with how we prepare ourselves to meet many possible opportunities, and not least to prepare ourselves to take those opportunities. So I think we're a complex mixture, and I think this parallels our evolutionary journey over those millions of years, whereby we have a basic skill set, some of which we are now our own masters in developing, and then the real where we need not just the brains and the preparation, but the courage is then to take opportunities as they present themselves, for which we have long prepared. So
you're concurring, you agree with this like life task?
I would say generally yes, but not to the extent of saying at an early stage we can say we definitely want to do X or we definitely want to do Y.
So this is a brief intermission. I hope you're enjoying the journey, and if you are enjoying the journey, why not consider hitting the like button and subscribe? I repeat, that's hitting the like button and subscribe. And with that being said, let's return to the program. So another concept that I really enjoyed from this book was, again, it was under the life task element, is that under listen to your authority, it says that you need to engage with your higher purpose through your uniqueness. And this involves working every day. So to put it in context, Picasso's higher purpose, one would assume, would be art, and he painted every day. Apparently, the final day on this earth, he painted the day before. Shakespeare, I would argue, his higher purpose would be of a writer, and his uniqueness perhaps was his excellence of telling a story. What would you say with regards to that?
Well, that's a very interesting one. So my interpretation of that is that if you do everything every day, that's precisely what you are doing. You're taking, and in fact you're doing it in a better way, because you're getting the muscle memory, you're getting the imprint in your brain, you're setting up the patterns and the habits that lead to, and you know, which are the equivalent of putting the paving stones down on the pathway to that goal. So I completely understand and agree with the idea that you should practice, because you become what you do.
Yeah, it's almost like a tennis player, isn't it? If you're a tennis player and you play once every 2 weeks, you're not going to be as good as that person who plays every day. So I think there is definitely a solid argument that regardless what path you take, whether it's art, whether it's boxing, whether it's science, you have to work on it every day. I guess the only thing I would add is you have to work on it effectively every day.
But suppose for example you're in a situation where you do work every day, but we all, we all get bored. We all get fatigued in some way. We have bad days.
Yeah.
How do you get through those? Because when you're in that position, let's say you're a chess player, you've learned 1,000 or 10,000 openings, and you suddenly find that your rating has plateaued. You're not even enjoying it anymore. Should you associate that feeling of something of, I suppose there's an element of defeat there. There's an element of boredom. There's an element of resistance. What should you do in that situation, and how do you judge whether to carry on or to jump ships and do something else?
That's a really good question. I guess it depends on the context. Thinking of, I guess if you're a writer and you write every day, and then you feel like now you've reached a point where you've plateaued and you're not writing good material anymore, I guess in that argument you could say, okay, now you've got to go out there and live a bit more, and then go back to your daily routine. So it's almost like you've got to absorb these new experiences, and these new experiences will stimulate the brain.
Yeah, so get some reflection, relaxation.
Yeah.
And so I guess the other, on that, I'm just thinking back to my own experiences. So, when I did a physics degree, for example, I can certainly tell you there were elements of electronics that could, to this day, put me to sleep. You have to take the rough with the smooth and the interesting bits. But I think in that situation, what kept me going was the fact that I had, if I kept going, I would achieve a goal. I would get my certificate. I would actually have a mark in the sand that I could use for the rest of my life. And also people around me chasing me, disciplining me, in the sense of they expect things to be done. So is it also a question of being part of a community? Is there some? Is it an individual thing, or how do you seek support?
So the next part of this first chapter, and to conclude this particular part, is I believe the heading is "Let a sense of purpose guide you," and there's this premise that is set out that modern society, the larger purpose is missing. And previously, this purpose would have been supplied by an organized religion. So here it's saying, this sense of purpose, it needs to guide you. And I guess this stimulates some interesting questions, or an interesting question, which is, what is life without a purpose? And how do we find our life's purpose? And I guess the way Robert Greene would answer that is to tapping into your unique DNA and listen to this inner voice. So when it says like let a sense of purpose guide you, I guess in a sense, like to put that in a real terms, if you've got someone who wants to be a writer but is working in a coffee shop, not that there's anything wrong with working in a coffee shop,
I do it all the time.
But that's not their life purpose. I guess to let the sense of purpose guide you, for that person who wants to be the writer, is to listen to that voice of being the writer, and then trying to devote time every day to become the writer. Is that how you would interpret that? Because that's how I interpret that.
Absolutely, because it develops the habit of using and developing the skill. You know, pretty much anything that's worth doing requires some sort of skill.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do it in at least in today's world, when you're exposed to everyone else who's doing it, in a competitive environment generally, you know, and you want to reach some level that is recognisable as an achievement. Absolutely, you need to develop those skills, and you need to do it, you know, with energy. You know, you need to be able to do it when you don't feel like doing it, and be really committed to it.
So, kind of to bring it back to the daily laws context, I guess when he's stating about let the sense of purpose guide you, I'm sensing what he's saying is that if you have that drive to be a writer, then you should go towards that. If you have a drive to be an architect, you should go towards that, and you should take practical steps, whether it's, you know, working every day, getting a mentor, going through education, whether that's formal or informal. But it's this whole thing of the power of purpose, and in a sense, as human beings on a psychological level, without purpose, can we say that we're nothing? And I guess to conclude this chapter, and I don't know if you agree with this, I think with regards to the real secret, so it's not the law of attraction, the real secret is to understand that the brain is the outcome of 6 million years of evolution, and therefore our brains are, you know, they're very primed and ready to do the job being of real mastery. I think there's some power in that message, and I think this whole premise of engaging with your higher purpose, I think it can have some significant value, and understanding the power of having a purpose and then trying to go through the process of fulfilling the purpose. What's your thoughts on that, just to conclude this part?
Well, all of this is nothing without action. So the key word there, I think, is fulfilling the purpose. And I think that activates the theory, and stimulates things like, as you mentioned, the practice, the rehearsal, the doing, learning by doing. Everything is about doing ultimately. So yeah, I completely agree with the ideas there, but I have a huge misgiving in all of this, which is, or a doubt, which is, there are people, I think, who, however hard they search, can't find that purpose, or can't find that drive or direction. Now, the question to me is, now that we've dealt with everybody else, how do we kindle a sense of purpose in people who don't feel it naturally, or aren't aware of it, or can't find it even if they search for it?
That's a good point, because it's almost like the premise of the book is that find your inner voice, meaning that you have an inner voice. Yep. Mm-hmm. What do you do if you don't have an inner voice? How do you find that inner voice? And I think that's a very logical point.
It might be meditation.
Yeah.
Might be asking friends.
But clearly he had that inner voice since he was 8.
Absolutely.
So it's not a question. He didn't need to find that inner voice. But like you said, some people, they may need help in finding that inner voice. So the second chapter is primarily about apprenticeship, and the first concept that really gravitated to me was this whole concept of mentorship. And I think from the Robert Greene universe, mentorship is needed for mastery to attain the life task. And then this brings about all types of questions. You know, what does a mentor look like? Apparently Warren Buffett mentored Bill Gates. Socrates, from the philosophical context, mentored Plato. So to me, I feel like a big part of mentorship is the sharing of knowledge. So my question to you would be, do you think mentorship is important? And if it is important, what does good mentorship look like?
Well, there's no question about the first part of that question that's important. I mean, our knowledge, our system of knowledge is based on, skills, knowledge, insights that have been acquired throughout our entire cultural history. That's why we read books. That's why we form teams, why we have supervisors. It's because we can, imbue our knowledge down to people who are coming up and learning, and it shortcuts the process of achieving a goal. So absolutely, to the first part of the question, it's a definite yes. So the second part of the question was, how do we recognise good mentorship?
Good effective mentorship.
Yeah, effective mentorship. Several ways, I think. So one clear way, I think, is if someone is widely recognised and already has a number of people who are mentees who you can point to and say, well, here's the track record. So a very, very simple test. Is this someone who has that skill? So, for example, a professor in a university might typically mentor a range of students, and you can be pretty assured that that's, in one sense, at least in an academic sense, good mentorship, because the students are achieving results, that they are giving good feedback, and so on. But then there are situations where mentorship is not a formal activity, as it would be in that case, the more informal sense. And there's probably a degree to which words such as friendship and mentorship overlap. The best friend you can have is not one who will tell you everything's fine, tell you you're fine, no problem, don't worry, I promise you all will be good. If anything, that is quite dubious. The best friend you can have is one who, first of all, is going to listen to everything you're going to say, and listen with intention, and listen with questions. Questions are a very important part of listening. But then the second part is to give honesty in terms of the feedback and so on, which everyone's free to take or leave. But I think then it sort of suggests that when you're trying to decide who your real friends are, they're not necessarily the people who you most want to see on a particular day, who are kindest to you. They could be the people who are giving you things you don't want to hear in a constructive way, in a friendly way, in a confidential way. So I think outside the domain of formal mentorship arrangements, it's really important to choose your friends wisely, because they are your mentors. Amongst that group would probably include parents. Parents are significant men, or could be significant mentors, one way or the other, for better or for worse. One thing you do know is that they generally have your interest at heart, and very well worth listening to, old-fashioned as that sounds.
So in one sense then, what you're saying is that you could have a mentorship isn't just a relationship with one person, it can be multifarious. So you could have your parents as a mentor, you could have certain friends as a mentor, you could have an uncle as a mentor, you could have a formal mentorship.
I think so.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess looking at it from the formal perspective, I guess if you were a scientist and you wanted to get better at science, you would need a mentorship program by a great scientist.
It would be nice. It would be nice.
as opposed to, it was a great mathematician or something, because obviously you're trying to, I think mentorship, to put it the other way, it's like, imagine if you wanted to be a writer and then you got mentorship by Robert Greene. That's like the top of the pyramid, isn't it? And I guess you would want the equivalent in any other fields, whether it's science, mathematics,
it could well be.
Sport,
it could well be.
Whatever.
Let me just slightly push back on that as being the only option. So that's a good option, I would have thought, but possibly not the only option. So, for example, there may be people whose skill is not the art itself, but the teaching of it. For example, when you look at, say, Magnus Carlsen, who recently won the World Championship for classical chess, playing Jan Nepomniachtchi, I can't think his name is. Must try and read that properly. They have teams of mentors, and not one of them is as good as either of the key players. Not one of them. So how is it that they can mentor them? And it's partly, it reminds me of the way one of my professors used to mentor me in a tutorial group. I'd ask a complicated question, and he never answered it. The way he responded was to ask me questions, and force me to, embarrass myself until I found the right answer. So I think there's, mentorship can come from people who actually have less skill in the actual domain itself, but have the capability of extracting from you what you could already know if you knew how to find it.
So in that sense, there's a difference between being brilliant in your field and being a brilliant mentor.
I think
Meaning you could be a great mathematician, but not a good mentor, but you could be a great mentor as a mathematician, but maybe not the greatest mathematician.
Absolutely. And that takes us back to the first segment, finding your purpose in life. It may be, well, if it's true that we have a unique purpose in the sense of, this calling, this kind of this feeling that we can discover as to where we want to go. It may be, it is the case, it should be the case, that nobody else would know that unless you tell them. Now, if you don't know what that is, it may be the right sort of mentor that can help you find it, even though they can't possibly know what it is, which illustrates the fact that the mentor doesn't have to be the expert in the achievement that's required. Much more to do with the development and bringing out of your skills.
So another thing that struck out to me on this chapter, which would have been February, is this whole concept of learning by doing. So I guess the question here is, what is the best way to learn? And according to Robert Greene, we accelerate our learning by doing. So I guess there's a few questions I have here. So number one, do you agree with that premise? Do we accelerate our learning by doing? And to you, where does university fall within that? Does the university engage in what Robert Greene would call real effective learning?
Well, that's an interesting point, because it brings together a number of the previous things we've talked about. I don't think you can learn by doing per se, because you may be doing all the wrong things and you will never learn anything. You may learn to break something, and that's about it. On the other hand, if you never do anything and you have simply an abstraction of what it is that needs to be done, again, it achieves nothing and it involves no learning. So it seems to me there's an essential symbiosis of previous experience, theory, practice, and then the doing. So in terms of the university and the way that, or universities and the way that fit into it, absolutely they're an essential part, firstly, to the theoretical and the underpinning, learning the knowledge, picking up the knowledge that has already been acquired over many, many years. And it's that knowledge which gives you the capability to do things. So I think it's an inseparable symbiosis of theory and practice, and universities perform an absolutely invaluable role in doing that. It's not just the learning. There's also something about universities which create a pathway with momentum and inertia that enable you to fight through the difficulties. You can get mentorship, you can get the theoretical background, you can get encouragement, you then publish papers, and you get some recognition, and in other words, it creates a pathway which, if people were to do this in their living rooms or their studies at home, we would not achieve a tiniest fraction of what we're able to achieve with the propellant force of the university.
Yeah, I think because I agree that we learn by doing, but if, like you're saying, we can't just do, there has to be a process. And I guess that process of action is important, but then, like you said, there's this process of reflection. It's almost like if we're trying to set up a business, but in theory it's the greatest business ever, but we don't do any action, that business definitely will not work. So action, like you said, is essential. It's an essential step, but it has to have a relationship with reflection, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's an iterative process as well. I think, as you're doing, you're now learning. What does learning mean? It means building more into that theoretical knowledge base. So you augment that theoretical knowledge base, and then your next bit of learning comes from the next bit of doing. In science, there's a much bigger extrapolation of that, which is that we well beyond the stage where we can use just the knowledge bit to produce information and understanding that we can never obtain through doing. And I suspect it's the same at every level of learning by doing.
And another concept, the final concept in this chapter, is the 10,000 hour rule. And this is the notion that mastery requires 10,000 hours. And the example given to illustrate this is Einstein, because apparently it took him 10 years for his own personal scientific mastery.
But let's take the Einstein example. So my recollection of Einstein is not so much that he took 10 years to master physics. It was never a linear process of, learning a bit more. Oh, there it is, general relativity. Nothing like that whatsoever. It was more about, he was sitting on a train. Okay, this is an equally stylized version, but sitting on a train, or while he was sitting on a train, doing his Gedanken experiment of figuring out what would happen if you were a particle of light and you were observed by observers in different frames of reference, and pretty much all his insights I could explain right now how he got them, without any maths, without any abstraction at all. It's really quite straightforward, but what did take a bit of time was to learn the maths. So this is the equivalent of the skill, the skill element, not the insight, not the genius, none of that, but just the skill. So that did take a little time, and he got a lot of help from somebody called Minkowski, for example, and others who were better mathematicians. But as for 10,000 hours to become the most recognised physicist since time began, it had nothing to do with it.
So I guess one of the issues with it, because I think what Robert Greene has argued in the past is that through an effective mentorship you can streamline that process and it can be more effective, and you can maybe engage in less hours. I think the first thing to establish here is that 10,000 hours is not the magic number. You just don't go 10,000 hours and it's like, I'm there, the magic is there. To me, when I look at the 10,000 hours, to me it basically says that if you engage a long time to a particular activity, you're solution focused, you use reflection, then you're likely to become very good at that particular thing. And I think in that inner core, or from that understanding, the 10,000 hours has some validity, but not as like this definitive scientific equation. So I guess in conclusion, I would say with regards to this chapter, the emphasis is mentorship, and I think mentorship definitely does streamline the process. It definitely is an effective way to get good at something. This premise of learning by doing, if the learning by doing has a relationship of reflection and learning, then I think also that's a real effective way to learn. I guess what we share here is a bit of a skepticism towards this 10,000 hours, but I think we both agree that if someone's good at something, so if someone has the inner voice and they're really good at this particular thing, and then they devote 10,000 hours to it, then yes, they can achieve mastery. But this 10,000 hours is a very generalized figure. It's not, it's not set in stone. What would be your conclusion on that chapter?
There's nothing you said I would disagree with. Other than not other than, but along with, to say that if someone does have that, that drive, that inner voice, that direction, do put in that. If 10,000 hours is good for you, do that. 5, whatever it takes. But it's the discipline that really matters.
So this is chapter 3 of Daily Laws, and we're just exploring various concepts. And one of the concepts that stood out to me in chapter 3 was this whole narrative of the importance of movement. And it states, quote, "Do not waste time on things you cannot change or influence. Just keep moving." End of quote. So what's your opinion in the sense of this whole concept of the importance of movement? Do you agree? Do you not agree?
Well, I would say I would generally agree, but I think there's a number of caveats to that. So I think it's a generally well understood point that if you can't influence, what is the point of wasting energy on it? But on the other hand, you have to take account of things that are standing in your way. And whilst you can't influence that thing, whatever it might be, directly, surely whatever it is that stands in your path has the a power to influence how you do other things, how you make other decisions. I guess, for example, if you, in a very practical sense, you can't do anything about the traffic jam on one road, you might reset your sat-nav to take another route. So I think what it is saying is that you may not want or be able to change a particular issue that is an obstacle or whatever, but surely you take account of it.
Yeah.
A second point is that how do you know? How can you test that you can't change or influence something? Is that an assumption or is it a fact? And the level of importance of that matter, then I think would persuade you to find creative ways to think whether maybe you can change it. We can't necessarily assume that something is unchangeable or uninfluenceable.
That's a good point, because it's almost like the premise. Sometimes you have to challenge the premise of can things be changed? And I guess once you've challenged the premise, then it's about establishing what's the most important way to keep moving. I guess maybe you could give an example. I could think of a couple of examples. Say, for example, if you're a boxer and you're unable to get the opportunities or get the fights that you want to get, and it's out of your control, because that would be the remit of a promoter. So you can't control that, but what you can control is training every day. You can control keeping yourself in shape, having good sparring, etc. I guess maybe it's the same assertion with a writer as well. It's like you might not be able to control getting an agent, or maybe you can control that, but I guess there may be certain instances where it would be difficult to control that, but maybe you could, or you definitely can, have a form of control in being a consistent writer, turning up every day with your cup of coffee, writing to try and get better at your craft. But I think once you've established that maybe you can't change something, then it is important to keep moving and keep progressing. So I think there's some validity to that statement. So another gem that stood out to me in this chapter, and I'll quote it specifically, is, quote, "Constantly remind yourself of how little you know and how mysterious the world remains." End of quote. And to me, I think this is important because I think a lot of people have a confirmation bias about how much they know about themselves and how much they know about the world. So I think this whole thing of reminding ourselves of the mystery of the world is good for our evolution, and it's good for our perspective. Do you agree with that? Is the world mysterious, or would you challenge that? What's your opinions on that?
Well, both really. So I would definitely agree that it is ultimately mysterious, and I don't think there's anyone in any discipline who can claim otherwise. However, it does seem to me that we live, and we can live in the real world at a level that we can understand very well. As a result of our evolution and so on, we have the capacity to understand things at the level at which we need it. So just to explain what I mean by the level of understanding for this, let's take our understanding of a cup. One level of explanation is that it has a certain shape, and due to the force of gravity, not that physicists would call it a force anymore, it's able to contain and retain liquids within its boundaries in such a state that it can be put into your mouth and drunk. So that's a level of explanation which makes complete sense for our everyday needs. At another level, there's the explanations of how the wave functions of the subatomic particles interact with this and are entangled with other particles, wave functions at the other end of the universe, and so on. And again, that's a level of explanation which is just as valid, but it exists on a different dimension. So my answer to that question, I think, is that we need to understand things at the level for which it is relevant to us. And in that sense, much of life isn't much of a mystery. We can understand it, we can make sense of it, we can navigate our way through it.
So I guess to conclude chapter 3 with the certain concepts that we've discussed, we've ascertained that yes, it's good not to waste our time on things we cannot change, but we have to understand the premise of can we change it or not. So yes, if we can't change something, we need to keep it moving, but also we need to sometimes maybe challenge that premise of can we or can't we change it. And with regards to the world being mysterious, on one hand, it's good to say that yes, the world is mysterious, but on the other hand, through science and through a lot of advancements, the world becomes less mysterious. So I guess it's what filter we put it through. So that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed this experience, then please share on your social media. Thank you.